In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Welcome to another special edition episode of Shift and Thrive as part of our go-to-market series. Today's episode is a bit different. We are not only talking about go-to-market and strategy, we're also diving into the psychology behind leadership and decision-making. And with that, my guest today is a seasoned go-to-market strategist and leadership advisor with over 2 decades of experience bridging the worlds of technology, marketing, business, and psychology. She was recently CMO of Austin Data Labs, where she helped transform the company's go-to-market, ultimately leading them towards a successful private equity acquisition. She's also a published author, podcast host, and founder of Mind Media Tech, where she now helps executive teams build psychologically safe, high-performance cultures and make smarter decisions at the top. Leslie Poston, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. How are you today, Natalie?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I am very excited for our conversation today. And to kick us off, I'd love to go back to your time at Austin Data Labs, where I know you helped take a relatively unknown AI company with limited go-to-market strategy to a $30 million ARR business that was ultimately acquired. I know you were navigating a lot of those typical kind of early stage challenges and different shifts in the organization. So can you start by, walking us through that transformation? How did you first approach defining or redefining the market strategy?
Sure. I think Austin Data Labs is unique for several reasons. One, it was a close-knit, small team that had been working together at previous companies for quite some time. So I came into a bonded group that already had a good deal of psychological safety happening. People trusted each other. They assumed good intent. So when you come into that environment, it's like cheating. It automatically makes changes like a shift in go-to-market strategy or an expansion so much easier. So I have to set that out. There was no need to do any coaching on that aspect of Austin Data Labs. And some executives come in and have to take care of the coaching hurdle first, right, when they want to change go-to-market. So that made the change management aspect of this pretty easy. One thing that was very interesting is because this was a B2B SaaS data science company, they were serving many industries when I joined them. They had been in business for, I think, about 4 years when I joined. They were probably at lifestyle business level is how I would describe them, right? They had happy customers, but they weren't growing. And they were serving the markets that interested them, which I think is a really common problem for startup cultures. Each person that brought in business that resonated with them personally. So they were serving oil and gas. They were serving aviation. They were serving restaurants. They were serving hospitals and healthcare. They were serving the food industry. So the first hurdle was determining where the customers were happiest and what part of the product served them best so that we could expand into that market. And that required a lot of meetings with the executive team. So the team was made up of the CTO, Sushil, who's a data scientist, a brilliant person, has a lot of patents under his belt, really drawn to complex problems. A man named Simon Drake, who has a degree in theoretical physics and ended up in the software world. So he loves broad network problems, right? And then you had Dave Brown, who was really strong in the ag industry, and Robert Martin, who's got a great MBA from Harvard, so really strong in the COO aspect. So I had a good backbone. Getting them on board with a shift required examining what was working and what wasn't. And we determined that the most enthusiastic customer should lead us, right? That was the main driver of the change. So for them, that was the agriculture and food and beverage industry. So they ended up pivoting away from oil and gas, healthcare, aviation, everything else, and focusing entirely on the food supply chain around the world. So big shift. It took about, I would say, a year to really hone in the marketing and hone in the sales team to have this new messaging that wasn't as broad. We ended up having to have several meetings with the rest of the company, the rest of the team. There were about 20 people, to make sure that everyone was on board and hear their feedback. And the most interesting aspect of this for me came from the Brazil team. So the company was global from the start, and we have an office in Brazil run by a brilliant team. And they had so much to say, especially about the food and beverage industry that they had been waiting to tell us. Right. So to give them the opportunity to brainstorm and help direct that marketing was an absolute unique opportunity. And it also enabled us to do, I would say, Portuguese and English marketing, right, which was a challenge for me. That was exciting. Finding content creators in Brazil that could write effectively in Portuguese about data science and the meat industry down in Brazil, which is what we were serving there. Was another challenge. That was really interesting.
Yeah. I think it's that shift from we serve kind of anywhere where we have a network or any market where we have a good solution for, and then needing to hone in on where do you place your bets. I think that can be a scary thing for organizations, especially in those earlier stages. Curious kind of what those discussions were like, and was that what did you do to kind of move the team through that?
Absolutely. So this is a data-driven team. It is the most data-driven team I've ever worked with. So we were not doing feelings marketing at this company at all. So we had to take the input of the data science team on what was truly effective and truly working in the software so that we didn't overpromise and underdeliver. And we had to take the customer feedback with us when we were having these discussions. So what was working for them. And as many software companies early stage do, the software had become a bit custom for each customer, right? We had the small team and the bandwidth to do changes that each individual customer wanted. So productizing the SaaS product and making it more uniform was another challenge. I would say that is the challenge that got the most friction, the most resistance, because Austin Data Labs has a policy or had a policy of hypercare. That's what they called it. So on for our customers 24/7, available by phone to any of them, anytime they wanted to call. So to change the product made some people concerned that we were going to be changing that aspect of the company. So that took some reassurance and some planning around customer satisfaction and putting in a framework, again, led by the Brazil team in this instance, where the customers were going to be served no matter what happened to the software. So,
did that include sunsetting customers that were no longer in the ICP, or how was that approached?
So we decided not to do that, in part because of the industry we chose. So some of the earliest customers were in agriculture and the food supply chain, and they were kind of our smallest customers. They were at the lowest price point, but one thing to know about serving the food and beverage and ag supply chain is those customers talk to each other. So that is a word of mouth industry. So we were not going to abandon those customers. We appreciated them for one thing, but also to choose that industry and then abandon the smallest customers in it would have been a mistake.
Yeah, which just goes back to knowing your market and really also bringing your company's values to everything that you do, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious a little bit more on the kind of the how of what did you change, and I've seen in these kinds of shifts you can do kind of rip and replace and get kind of everything ready behind the scenes and then relaunch, or more incremental, and like what do you prioritize, especially when you have a lean team and all of that. So can you talk a little bit more about how you went about that?
Sure. So we decided to prioritize customer care and customer experience at the heart of the marketing above all else. We did not start ABM until I was there for about 3 years. Like, we held off on all of that to just focus on the care aspect. And what that entailed was using the internal team to and the executives to drive the content direction, to train the sales team on what we wanted them to say, and then hiring vendors that could help us. So there were two key vendors that really made this project a success. One was a tech reporter in Brazil. I'll record a sound clip of her name separately for you because I actually need to get her permission to tell you. Sorry. She was lovely, and she generated so much content for sales and marketing for us in Brazil. It was astounding how quickly she worked and how much she could generate for us. But she's also a tech journalist in her spare time. So she was one of those rare vendors where she brought her network with her to this project. So I would say would not have been as successful in Brazil without that vendor's help. I do not speak Portuguese. I've tried to learn it. I just speak Spanish, but Portuguese is very difficult. The other vendor that was instrumental in the success was Pixel Media. I don't know if you've heard of them at all. It's run by a woman named Heather, who's lovely. She embedded herself in the company to help us change the UX. So the user experience of the actual software. When I got on board, the company was all men, except for me at first. We did fix that later on. But the original software was orange, red, and black with white lettering over all of it. And very masculine, very difficult to read and experience. Didn't look as polished as the software functionality was, right? It didn't match what it was doing for customers. So we changed that before we changed anything else about the marketing. We focused on that for a year. Heather embedded with the company, she and Jim, also at Pixel Media, became almost part of the Austin Day Labs family, so to speak. Really got to know each of our customers, understood how they use the software in and out, and helped us change it to make sure that the way the customer was being served really reflected what we were doing for them. Because the interesting thing about Austin Data Labs is you're serving these big food industry customers. So for them, a 3% increase in efficiency or reduction in fuel is billions or millions of dollars, right? So our software at first did not reflect that visually or in the experience.
You talked about, Heather and her team really embedding themselves, which, speaking as a marketing services provider, I think is the way we like to work with our clients. I'm curious to hear, just like in terms of your marketing structure overall, like how did you build the team? How did you decide kind of where to bring in outside support, what to keep internally? Can you talk a little bit about that journey for you?
Sure. So what we needed first and most was content, right? So much more than I could generate. So all of my hires were content hires and then leaning on the executive team. And so we took a thought leadership approach to content. So we were interviewing our executives and our customers constantly to make videos, which resonate very well with this market, podcasts, which resonate very well with this market. They're on the go, they're listening in their cars. That's what we needed to do. And then we really focused on case studies and customer testimonies and all of that customer marketing because the customers loved Austin Day Labs so much. So another rare occurrence when a customer is begging to give you a testimonial. It's like someone handed me a gift with this company, right? I didn't have to do the extra work of convincing anyone. So that was lovely. So anyway, we drilled down on content and then hired out for the more technical aspects that we couldn't do. So like UX, programming, when we wanted to do like a whiz, I can't talk today, when we wanted to do a feature on the website to calculate savings, anything like that, we were hiring out for that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And then, how did the team evolve in the time that you were there?
Not much, honestly. It's lean and mean, scrappy little team. And when we were acquired, even the company that acquired us had a lean, mean marketing team. I think there were only 13 people on the marketing team for a company. The acquiring company had almost 700 people in the company. So very small marketing teams. And I think that is representative of the agriculture industry, very scrappy as an industry, always doing more with less. So that felt appropriate. And luckily, because I've been doing this so long, I know a ton of vendors that can always jump in and help us out. So
yeah, I think we see that in general, for kind of the SMB lower mid-market is, keep the teams small and tight, and everyone has their area of expertise, but also knows how to wear multiple hats the right way, you can get a lot done without adding a lot of the, I would say, like bureaucratic layers that sometimes you experience. That I think in these days with these markets and how much is changing, you need that agility, and you need a small team that works really well together.
The interesting thing, too, is I was doing this during COVID. So the entire time I was at Austin Data Labs, I joined in 2020, right after the COVID lockdowns hit. So for the first 3 years, we didn't meet each other in person. We were all working at our homes remotely, which is kind of a testament to the team that we were able to be so successful doing that. And so I think what was missing from the marketing at Austin Data Labs was the ability to hire an events person, because the agriculture is also a very in-person industry. And so had it not been COVID, the events would have been my first hire. And I probably would have hired 2 events people to go to various events around the country. But that didn't happen because of COVID. So
Right. Got to build the team for the times you live in.
exactly.
Yep. So I'd love to shift gears a bit and really, after you led this go-to-market transformation and saw it through the acquisition, I know you made a big pivot and launched your own firm that helps companies build psychologically safe teams and kind of improve leadership function. Can you talk about, how your current work reflects some gaps that you've maybe seen in various parts of your career, and kind of the impact that you hope to have on those teams now?
Certainly. So I'll start by talking about the top level, the C-suite, a little bit. So one thing that people may not know about being in the C-suite, like if they haven't gotten there yet in their career, is that it can be very isolating. It can be incredibly lonely to be at the top. And what ends up happening is you get kind of in a bubble, and you only talk to a handful of people. They may not understand your company. They may be in your company and not have your best interest at heart. But in general, I found that people in the C-suite tend to get a lot of very bad advice from people that are supposed to be helping them out. And that, coupled with some residual office culture issues centered around communication and command and control leadership versus collaborative leadership, flexibility versus rigidity and cognitive function. All of that can combine to make a C-suite have such bad leadership that companies flounder. And especially when you're looking at times like we're in right now, where everything is always in flux, that's going to make a company struggle, because we're not able to be in control anymore, and we have to work with that instead of the world we wish we had. So
yeah. And I know in very large organizations, it can be hard to kind of bridge from the C-suite down through kind of all the different departments across the organization. In theory, it should be kind of easier in smaller company environments, though I think some of those symptoms that you're describing are prevalent regardless of company size to some degree. So I'm curious, for all the CEO listeners in our audience, like, how do you make sure you're getting good and honest advice from your team and from anywhere in the org?
I think the key, and why I talk so much about psychological safety, is to not breed a culture of dissent, right? So they have that kind of trope at McKinsey. I used to work at McKinsey back in the day. And they say they have a culture of dissent, and you're supposed to be able to speak up and up the chain about ideas that you have. But what ends up happening is you get more of a culture of devil's advocates when you say you have a culture of dissent, which is not the goal, right? So a true psychologically safe team feels comfortable communicating with each other about what we're learning from mistakes, what we're learning from failures, praising people for successes, not just in a performative way, but in a real, hey, you specifically did this thing that helped us. Thank you. And more importantly, communicating with the C-suite more often and differently. So a lot of HR teams will, and no shade to them, this is just what we've been doing for a long time. A lot of HR teams will suggest one-on-ones with your, skip level management, or they'll suggest more company offsites. And those are not bad things, but especially the one-on-ones don't really solve the psychologically safe teams problem. What ends up happening with that is you get a more combative, what are they talking about in their one-on-one versus what we're talking about in mine? environment, which kind of, again, goes into that command and control problem that some companies tend to have. So we found, psychologists have found that it's better if you do more group events, if you allow people to speak. And there are a variety of ways to do that to honor the various personalities on your team: introvert, extrovert, neurodivergent. One of the keys is not to make everyone speak, right? We're kind of, as extroverts especially, we kind of lean into wanting everyone to have a chance to talk. That puts your introverts and your neurodivergent folks on the spot. So what I found is effective is send around a email right before the meeting and right after the meeting saying, what did you not get to say in the meeting? Tell us now, so they're not on camera. Or what would you like us to talk about in the upcoming meeting? Why don't you tell me in an email? That helps people participate and be involved without being put on the spot, which creates that sense of psychological safety. So
I like that. I think that's a great tip. I'm an introvert, but I'm one that likes for everybody to have a chance to speak. And I think that idea of kind of keeping some of that for after is a great approach. Are there any other kind of tips or habits that you've seen in your clients that work really well for driving that kind of culture?
yeah, I think one of my favorites is open office hours, especially on Zoom. So when someone, a CEO or CMO, whoever, just says every Wednesday, I'm going to turn my Zoom on public from 2 to 3, come co-work with me, right? And we'll talk through co-working. It gives people a very casual environment to ask them questions and to get to know them as a person, which makes them feel less far away and makes them trust their advice more. So it's like you just have to bridge the gap. And if you're in an in-person office, you should still do it on Zoom. Otherwise, you're kind of going to get like a big team meeting experience in the conference room, which is not the same atmosphere. It doesn't really have the same impact. So,
yeah, I can see that. Leslie, I'd love to talk to you a bit about decision making. And again, like in leadership, you have so many different things coming at you. Sometimes you're making decisions with limited information, limited time, getting lots of different opinions. Do you have any guidance around how CEOs, other executives should be, working through their decisions?
sure. So I think what's really interesting in business is we love to say or think we have good instincts about business and good instincts about decision making. And I'm guilty of this myself. But what usually is happening is we're stuck in system one thinking. So that's a phrase coined by Daniel Kahneman. And what that means is your knee-jerk, instinctive lizard brain response. And that's rarely correct because that comes from a place that is protective and wary. And so we have to kind of take a beat and move the thought and the decision into system two thinking, which is more collaborative and more patient and lets you make a better decision. And in order to do that, you need to have trusted advisors on your team that you are not necessarily friends with, right? So the tendency is to hire people we know and hang out with people we know and trust the people that we see most often, right? Kind of default to that presence as the reason we ask someone for advice. And I would say build an advisory team made up of people at all different phases of their career that you don't necessarily know or are friends with, and that have a well-rounded approach to business and life, and that are strong where you're not. So if you're one of the CEOs who loves to help marketing and really understand sales, then you're going to need a group of trusted advisors that don't have those skill set for you. If you're a different kind of CEO that is strong in finance and is really a number cruncher, a data guy, you're going to need to have advisors that are stronger in the soft skills, right, to help you make better decisions. So, build an advisory team and meet with them often.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great. I think in my own experience, like you can have that more informally, like having different folks in your network that you can go to for different topics. I know some will build it almost like a board, but more of an advisory board.
Yeah.
And then, from my own experience, I'm a member of Entrepreneurs Organization and have this group of kind of 8 other business owners that, we range in age from I think 30 to 65. We've got services firms, product companies, founders, people that have, bought into the business, and having all those different experiences and having them know kind of your goals for the business and your personal life, I think can be very beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
Another topic I want to ask you about, there's been a lot of talk about kind of burnout and turnover. I think not as much about like what's causing it structurally in organizations. So curious, how does psychological safety or lack of psychological safety kind of impact performance, and how does that tie in with kind of those topics like burnout and turnover?
Yeah, sure. So there's a variety of work environments that aren't psychologically safe, and I'm sure everyone has experienced at least one of them. You could have a gaslighting manager, which is unfortunate when that happens because you're being worked to the bone and being made to feel a little crazy, right? And so that leads to burnout. You could have an insecure manager. That's a tough one when your manager is insecure. And then the most high-performing people on the team are going to get burnout because they're the ones that threaten that manager the most. You could also have someone on the just regular employee level that maybe is having a hard time in their life that's bringing that trouble and that toxicity into work because they don't have safe places outside of work. I mean, when we say you bring your whole self to work, we mean it. You can't just leave that stuff at the door. Uh, and if the team is not psychologically safe, they don't have a way to deal with that, to offer that person help and protect the team from their toxic vibe, right? From what they're experiencing outside of the office. You can also have, I want to say, not dishonest leadership. That's not the word I'm looking for. Siloed leadership. So information hoarders that protect the information that goes up their particular function in the company and don't share with other parts of the company, that ends up creating burnout as well because people are constantly having to work twice as hard to get the information they need to do their job. And it also hits the company's bottom line when these things happen, right? You make less money if people are constantly treading water trying to get their jobs done. So.
Yeah. And when you're working with leadership teams, are there any kind of, I guess, natural starting points to look at where you can have the biggest impact? Any kind of, I guess I don't want to call it lower hanging fruit, but to some degree, like what areas do you try to like address first?
So one of the first things I do is ask to sit in on a couple of all team meetings from different departments because it's hard to give a company advice if I haven't experienced what's going on. And people kind of forget I'm there. I'm just quiet. And then they just act like themselves. At first, I wasn't sure I would see the real thing when I started doing this, but we do. Generally, I found that there's either one or two people on the C-suite that are setting the tone for the rest of the company that are struggling to get away from that command and control leadership. They're struggling to be transparent about what the company needs from their employees or to give good direction. And occasionally there's also some pressure coming from the board. So depending on whether you're VC, private equity, public company, whatever your company structure is, each board will give you different pressures. So I will say getting acquired by private equity was my first experience personally with private equity. And I found that very interesting because I was expecting them to be more focused on money. And I'm sure they were focused on money, but their board was actually pretty good at getting the marketing team, for example, to focus on demonstrating real results from their marketing. They were very focused on attribution. They were very focused on how do you track an event, which is smart for a board. Boards are not usually that well-versed in marketing, so that was unique. Too often you have another kind of board where they don't know what your company does. They don't understand the org structure and they only want to make money. And so all of their advice is extractive, which does not help you build a psychologically safe team. So.
Hey, this is Natalie, your Shift and Thrive host. After chatting with lots of CEOs, one thing is crystal clear. Leveling up your company means having a killer go-to-market strategy. That's what my crew at Magnitude Consulting does every day. If you're trying to step up your marketing game, whether it's strategizing, accelerating your pipeline, expanding into new markets, or getting into AI and automation, let's talk. No pitch, no pressure, just good conversation. Visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com/Natalie to schedule a time. Can't wait to connect. So, Leslie, I want to shift gears a bit. And I know executive leadership and AI is an intersection point where you have a lot of experience and a lot of passion. And I think you've done some fascinating work on how our brains interact with AI. I listened to a podcast episode of yours recently and talking about how some of these like LLMs can change how we think and make decisions. Um, Wanted to hear from you, like what should CEOs like be aware of when they think of these tools and how they're shaping, I guess, their own teams, and then maybe later we can talk about kind of the team's effectiveness.
Sure. So I see 3 risks for AI for the C-suite right now that are, I would call them the most important risks. Any new technology has a long list. The first important risk I would say is information privacy and corporate IP protection if you're a big corporation. So I would encourage the C-suite to learn how to host their own ChatGPT on their own servers and not use the public OpenAI and Claude AI, because that's just going to be more secure. If you're going to double down on AI, truly double down on it. There are tons of free lessons from people like Chris Penn who are teaching you how to do this. It's not hard. It is not hard. And most phones and laptops can support an LLM instance installed on them at this time. And then you get one that's trained on your business model, your IP, your content, and most of them have also an academic training set, so you get that knowledge as well. The second caution I would say for executives is what I'm going to call this brain smoothing, and other psychologists are going to get a little mad at me because that's the Reader's Digest version, but using LLM AI, generative AI specifically, which is different than machine learning AI, using LLM AI reduces your cognitive function. Kind of no matter how much you use it, it makes it harder to be creative and harder to think of ideas. It feels like it's helping you, but it's really not. So I would say if you have your content team using AI, I would pay attention to how your content changes and whether it's becoming more boring. And it sounds like everybody else's B2B content, because it's going to be affecting your content team's literal brain and how they generate ideas. And then the third caution I would have with AI is really, I would say there is a concern, especially for companies that have a sustainability mandate in place, about the environmental cost of all of these AIs. And I don't just mean energy use, right? So there's some pollution issues, other things. So as people start to quantify that, it will start to count against your sustainability goals. So I'm thinking of, for example, in the agriculture food space that I just left, they have scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions goals that they focus on from the farm all the way to the grocery store and your table. They're paying attention to not just methane gas from cows and what the crops put off, like corn sweat that I'm sure you've heard about in the news, but the load, the truckload, the diesel fuel and exhaust and everything else. So this will become another number in that calculation pretty soon as we learn to calculate that. So.
Yeah. I want to talk about number 2 that you gave, that the brain smoothing, and how do you keep that friction? Because I think the reality is, as AI proliferates, Gen AI specifically, as we're talking about, there is the pressure. I hate to say do more with less, right? Which we can have a whole separate discussion on that. But I think there's also like a right way to use it. Like I'll give myself as an example, and you can tell me I'm not correct in that, but right, like I might be curious about a topic, have a conversation with, let's say, ChatGPT, and then kind of do some talking with peers, do some writing, like ask, say, here's what I'm thinking about, come back like devil's advocate. So I guess long-winded way of asking, like, is there a right way to use these tools that does not kind of erode any cognitive friction?
I would say there's a better way. I don't know if there's like a right way, but anytime you want to use it to create, I would not do that. I would continue to have the friction of the blank page. and continue creating yourself. However, it's very useful for speeding up your process in other ways. So, for example, I do use LLM AI to help me with the podcast. And the way I use it in the podcast is to write outlines, right? So I will spew my idea for an episode into the chat. And I have an LLM on my computer, so I'll spew it into the LLM. It'll come back with a neatly structured outline, which saves me a ton of time. I don't have to think about the flow of each episode. It is not good as a search engine. It's a little concerning that people are using it as search for so much, but it is not good as a search engine because it lies too much. It hallucinates. So you're not getting accurate information, but organizational, sorting your thoughts, taking something complex and making it simple enough for you to learn it. That's another good thing. So universities right now are using it to parse some of the more complex papers. So it's not going to understand math as well, because again, this is language model, not machine learning. But it can tell you the research question from a paper and summarize it in, if you use Notebook LM, it'll summarize it in a little podcast for you, which is kind of neat if you're an auditory learner, right? So just use it to augment, I guess is what I'm saying, and not make. So,
yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm interested to get maybe a bit more personal, at least as far as your career goes. And one thing that stood out to me is, how intentional you've been, and especially now in building your consulting practice. And I know you're doing that while we're completing your doctorate, which I imagine is no small feat. I'm curious, how your research has influenced your leadership style, or vice versa.
I would say my leadership style has influenced my research a little bit because I believe so strongly in collaboration. But my dissertation topic is linguistic adaptation to algorithmic suppression. So, which is just a really fancy way of studying why we change our language to accommodate tech instead of changing the tech. That's what I'm studying. So the psychology of that mechanism.
And where do you think that heads kind of in the years ahead? And I'm especially thinking about kind of where innovative ventures are headed, where your technology as an industry is. How do you think this shows up in the years ahead?
That's a great question. You can see some of it showing up now a little faster than people are prepared for. Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, you can see more surveillance that is reaching into everyone's pocket, so to speak, whether it's appropriate or not. How we handle this moment will actually determine what happens in the future. So the more we have anti-censor or anti-children laws on the internet, like I forget what the one in the UK is called, where they just have you uploading your ID into YouTube and Spotify now. The more we have that type of surveillance, the more we have biometric surveillance, the fewer things we can do to innovate as humans. So if we want a better future with more AI, more fun stuff, more thriving companies and thriving people, I would say removing the surveillance aspect of our tech is going to be pretty key for that happening. If the surveillance aspect stays in, then what you're going to see is a flattening of content, ideas, creativity, and opportunity. Because there's a psychological trigger that being watched pushes in people's brains, where we automatically adjust ourselves to fit. If you've read science fiction, they usually call that the panopticon, is the science fiction trope for that. And it's just something humans naturally do when they're being surveilled or watched.
And from your own personal experience, as you navigate these times, are there things that you do to protect your own energy, to avoid burnout, either practicing what you preach or otherwise?
Yes. So I do two main things to avoid burnout. One of them is I walk every day, no matter the weather. I live in Oregon, so sometimes that's damp. And the other thing I do is log off, which is sometimes harder than it looks, and go and help someone in person, right? So I belong to a group that helps a food pantry. I belong to a mask block that helps people that are too ill to leave their homes get tests and masking and healthcare. Doing that every week keeps me centered and grounded and keeps me from burning out.
Yeah, I love that. I think that the point about, walking, for me, my morning workout is key to my mental health. But beyond that, just any time outdoors, even if it's, 5 or 10 minutes in between meetings or something like that, it makes such a big difference. And it can feel very hard to pull yourself away,
Yes.
but it pays dividends.
Yes, sometimes I will do a walking meeting if I haven't been able to get out. Those are good as well, but not a true break. So yeah.
Right, for sure. Leslie, this has been such a rich conversation. I have one other topic I'd like to get your thoughts on.
Sure.
And really, for CEOs and founders who are navigating this constant change right now, do you have any advice for them as they kind of prepare themselves for the world ahead?
I think so. I think the key going forward is going to be flexibility. And by that, I don't just mean caving into what other people want. That's not the way that I mean that. I mean actual cognitive flexibility, to have a growth mindset. So there was a great book put out a few years ago by a woman named Carol Dweck about growth mindset. I think every executive should read it if they haven't already and kind of absorb the lessons in it, because you're going to be entering an era where it is always constant change. The nice 2019 stable times are not coming back, even if we want them to, right? Because of everything that's going on around the world. So being flexible is how you're going to survive, and it's how your company's going to survive too.
Yeah. Well, that's the premise of my podcast, right? Change is the only constant. And so what
Exactly.
do we do as leaders to keep pace with that? So we've come around full circle.
Yep.
And as we wrap up today's conversation, can you let our listeners know where they can reach you?
Sure. So you can go to mindmedia.tech, my website. There's a contact form on there, or you can send me an email directly at sayhi@mindmedia.tech.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leslie. This has been a great conversation.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you to everyone listening. I loved hearing so much of what Leslie shared, how she uses these psychological safety insights to help executives, some of the interesting and important views on the future and how we can keep ourselves prepared for that. So if today's episode gave you any valuable insights, and I'm sure that it did, please share this with someone. We know that sharing this kind of knowledge and information helps us all grow as leaders and helps us drive successful organizational transformation. So thanks again, Leslie. And this has been another insightful conversation on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.